There's about a 99% chance I'm actually going to play Deadeye Helix as my league starter for the SSF Hardcore boss race. My god, have I gotten a lot of questions about this over the past couple of days, and I figured I'd address every single one of them here, go over the build, and run through why I take the decisions that I do. So, an overview of the build. This is really similar to the Assassin setup. It's a Helix abusing Nightblade still, except I'm going pure elemental this time as opposed to going poison. And the damage of this build is a little bit higher, and it's actually quite a bit tankier than the Assassin as well. The biggest reason why I want to do this over the Assassin though, is because it doesn't rely on any core uniques, and for an SSF run that's fairly short, this will be quite beneficial. On my estimated day 1 gear, I'm reaching about 1 million average hit, which means, you know, somewhere in the range of 2 to 3 million DPS. There's no focus poison, the uptime is fairly straightforward, and there's not really too much to calc. But ultimately, this isn't necessarily a build for you, this is a build for me. This is a build that I will be playing to push the race as fast as I possibly can. If you get mediocre RNG on your weapon rolls, you have a really good chance of winning the race playing this against things like Seismic Trap. It does have faster mapping, and I believe that the act progression can be faster. The only thing this thing really lacks is uptime. So we don't know how the new boss encounters will look, and Seismic Trap has the benefit of being a really good uptime build that can be really far away. On the other hand, Spectral Helix is basically a melee build, so you might have to disengage at times. It's also a bit weird to estimate the EHP for this build. With maximum Gale Force, I'm taking a max hit of about 60k. Now, if there's also an enemy marked beside that, then my max elemental hit goes up to something like 70k. Which is really high for max hit. In terms of EHP though, this thing easily gets over 200,000 EHP because of avoidance layers like Evasion, Grace, Determination, Defiance Banner, which every single build should have. If you look at a build guide right now and it doesn't have Grace, Determination, and Defiance Banner, that build guide is basically garbage. Don't refer to it, and you probably shouldn't trust whoever's making that guide. Additionally, elusive and elusive scaling with Nightblade ends up resulting in a lot of generic based avoidance, which is really strong as well. The slightly weaker component is your physical mitigation, but it's no weaker than a Seismic Sabo. I'm taking double Aura Clusters in order to scale both the Determination and the Defiance Banner. This is also a suppression capped build. And finally, the most important thing for me, it's a very fast build, both in terms of attack speed and movement speed. This means you can dodge a lot. It's considerably faster than the Assassin because you're a Deadeye with Gale Force and Tailwind stacking. Jumping to the POB, let's go over some of the gear. So this is a Deafening Essence of Wrath Crafted Claw. Any Deafening Essence that's elemental, so anger, hatred, or wrath will work. You just want to slam some claw, hope you hit at least one of attack speed or crit, and then bench craft the other one. It's fairly likely to hit. I recently did a run from Complete Fresh and I used an Anger this time. It's not a huge difference, but this is something that's really realistic to get in a fairly short race. Your shield, you're looking for things like life, suppression, resistances, and chance to block attacks is also fairly strong. Your helmet is really interesting. The helmet is very important to have an open suffix on, because this open suffix will allow you to craft on trigger socket spells when you focus. And this gives us an instant cast of Hydrosphere and Tornado. These two skills are linked with increased duration and onslaught. And what this does is gives you permanent onslaught on bosses, which is super powerful. It gives you exposure automatically applied that will also have permanent uptime on bosses. And Tornado is a significant damage multiplier, probably somewhere between 25 to 50%. You really want to start attacking a boss 4 or 5 times, and then pop this focus button to really maximize the damage you're getting. For your chest piece, another life, suppression, resistance piece, but you want another open prefix this time to get the Gravicious craft of gain maximum life as energy shield. This is really important to get Ghost Shrouds. For ideal mods on everything else, you're looking for things like elemental damage with attacks, a single accuracy rule, maximum life, resistances, and suppression. In terms of Ascendancy, a lot of people have been asking why I'm not going Raider. And it's because Raider basically gives you nothing. If you go Raider in the early game, what you tend to go for is Onslaught, phasing from Quartz Infusion with 40% suppression, which is really good, that 40% suppression, Frenzy Generation and +1 Frenzy Charge, and then one of these two nodes to either scale more Onslaught effect and Evasion, which I think is the right decision, or you could go for this for Exposure application, which is okay for this build. Now the thing is, because of my Focus Helmet, I already have Exposure applied and I have Permanent Onslaught. And because of Mark changes, I will also have Permanent Frenzy Generation because of a new Mark Mastery introduced in the tree in patch 3.17. Of course, Quartz Infusion is still really strong. So then you look at Deadeye. And what Deadeye gets is something like 60% more damage clean because of Far Shot. And if you don't know how this works with Spectral Helix, you can refer to my Fledgling video. Additionally, you get Tailwind, you get Mitigation, which is actually fairly consistent. Because of how much attack speed you have and Withering Step and Focus, you actually have really good Windward uptime. And lastly, you have increased Mark Scaling and Mark Proliferation. And this will be even better come the buffs to this in patch 3.17 and the changes to Marks. This is a setup that will be incredibly powerful in 3.17 and incredibly automated in 3.17. And on balance, Deadeye gives you something like 50% more damage and makes you probably 10 to 20% tankier than Raider, straight up. The rest of the tree looks a bit weirder than normal, but it's fairly straightforward. I do go for projectile nodes because you don't get that much increased projectile damage on this tree because of early league progression. I'm taking projectile nodes everywhere, and I'm only taking a single projectile speed node. I don't really like even having ballistics, but it's an okay node overall, and I'm just going for it because it's part of the natural pathing for the leveling process. You're looking to get one suppression wheel here, and you could go for another suppression wheel either at Instinct or over at Inveterate. Either of them are accessible, but they do require some repathing on the tree. Ideally, you get maximum suppression on your gear. While Masteries continue to be incredibly important, incredibly powerful, you get 40% increased Nightblade effect from this. This dagger node is really good. Even though we're your claw build, you still want this dagger node because you get 40% increased effect of elusive, and you also get this elusive grants 40% crit multi for skill support by Nightblade. The second claw mastery take is also very important. This is blind. So not only does this give you an additional layer of mitigation and avoidance, this also helps you hit accuracy cap on bosses. Of course, you want 2 aura clusters and you're going ghost dance, and you might go for this chaos cluster depending on what kind of fight you're doing, what kind of damage is coming out. You just need to know the boss. There's a couple other things on this tree, but the biggest thing I want to talk about is this single mastery. So on the surface, this looks like 20% increased damage for projectiles that pierce, and Spectral Helix has infinite pierce, so that looks like 20% damage. Except this modifier applies for every single mob that Spectral Helix pierces. In other words, if there's 100 mobs on your screen, and Spectral Helix rotates once, hitting every single mob, that's 2000% increased damage. This is the reason why when I play this build in Simulacrum, on day 1 gear, I'm able to get 4 rewards easily with no bosses, even as I enter wave 26, 27, 28, and 29. This modifier is simply insane for mob clear, so if you're in a setting where you feel like your mob clear or your map clear is starting to lack damage, grab this right away. Even in your invitations though, this is a fairly strong mod, probably giving an average DPS increase of like 40 to 60%, depending on how many bosses you're hitting, how many bosses already spawn at the time. But I think this is a super underrated mastery. As far as the skill gem setup goes, I have my 6th link, Spectral Helix, and I've already mentioned the helmet setup for focus trigger. Additionally, I have an Assassin's Mark with Hex Touch and Life Tap. So this is accounting for new patch changes. Hex Touch will actually be mark on hit, which will allow you to automate Assassin's Mark, and this is super helpful for mapping QOL. You can use a level 1 Assassin's Mark, and you have enough mana unreserved to do this. In fact, I have enough mana unreserved to run a level 20, even with the 300% mana multiplier of Mark on hit. However, you can also run Life Tap, and this is always going to be okay on a Claw build. Because the thing is, Claw builds are really OP on everything except damage. Now, of course, this build has insane damage because we're using Nightblade. Life gain on hit with Claws is incredibly broken, and you don't really care about spending a little bit of life every 4 seconds. My aura setup is Determination, Defiance, Banner, and Ball of Grace, and I'm also running Herald of Ice. Herald of Ice can be substituted for precision if you're lacking accuracy, but I like the feeling of Herald of Ice, and I think you will too. Withering Step is really important to run. You'll have this on left click. I did not realize that people didn't know that you're supposed to run Withering Step on left click for Nightblade builds, but this is absolutely mandatory. If you don't do this, you're losing over half of your damage, guaranteed. A faster attacks and Rolling Blades is my primary movement skill of choice, and then I also have a Flame Dash to get over ledges and an Ancestral Protector to increase our attack speed. There's not that much socket flexibility on this build. It is fairly heavy on socket pressure because of this Focus, Tornado, Onslaught, and Hydrosphere. For leveling, I use a Galvanic Arrow early on, and I link that with Onslaught and Pierce, and I'm pathing over here and grabbing Primal Spirit right away because this really helps out with your attributes and mana gain on hit. Immediately after, I'm going to be pathing over to Forces of Nature, and then slowly moving my way up to Life Rigor. At this point in your leveling, you want to transition over to Claws and Spectral Helix. At that point, you'll be losing Helix, Onslaught, and probably Added Cold. As you get towards Act 3 and towards Normal Lab, you want to be grabbing a couple of things. Firstly, you want to grab both Claw Clusters, one of them being Life Gain on hit, and the other one grabbing you Elusive Mastery. And then you want to path down here and grab the Dagger Mastery for the second Elusive Mastery and Elusive Effect. You can see the level required here is level 32, which is roughly when you should be getting Normal Lab done. And at this point, you're going to grab Tailwind first. I think this is really important. A lot of people will go for Far Shot, which is also a really good option up here, and this will give you more damage, but you shouldn't need damage. In fact, the moment you grab this Mastery Cluster and this Mastery Cluster, you're going to have insane damage for the rest of the game. But you really want to be running the following. You want to run Spectral Helix, Onslaught, Nightblade, and Increased Critical Strikes. Increased Crit will tend to be better than Trinity because it gives you better uptime on Nightblade. You also want to start left-clicking Withering Step at this point. Moving into Cruel Lab, you'll want to grab this Aura Cluster because this will start to let you run things like, your Determination Grace setup, And you want to grab these for things like strength, a little bit of intelligence up here, and life and attack speed. You'll also want to round out this clock cluster because these nodes are extremely powerful, and I think at this point now you're starting to look towards getting a lot of life, maybe a little bit of suppression over here towards quickstep if you need it, and then grabbing the 2 most important life masteries in the game. You'll also want to grab these 2 leech nodes because they will be what you take later on. Early on, life cannot hitch to be able to sustain you entirely, but you'll still notice the effect of leech. As you progress towards the final tree, there's different things you can do. If you lack intelligence, you might go up and get Ridden Blood first. If you feel like you're lacking damage, you'll want to come down here and grab Primeval Force and Elemental Mastery right away. And then grab the Projectile Mastery I mentioned before. If you manage to have good Energy Shield on gear and also good evasion, you'll want to grab Ghost Shroud really early. But ultimately, the tree after that is very, very flexible. So just some rounding thoughts. I know people have a lot of skepticism towards Deadeye, especially in SF Hardcore, but I recently did a run all the way up to T16s where my first death was to Tolman's Detonate Dead in an Invitation, which literally won't exist in patch 3.17, and my second death was to Phoenix, which I significantly misplayed, while I was roughly at 4k life. The thing is, Deadeye looks like it has really contingent defenses, and there are hypothetically a lot of scenarios in which Deadeye defenses could fall apart. But because of the reality of how difficult encounters play out, Deadeye tends to have actually really effective defenses. Now you really want to think for yourself what every single encounter looks like, and this is what the top hardcore players do. They know the types of things that can kill them, and they know when to play more defensively and when to mitigate things. In softcore, this build is just cracked. You have great avoidance, you almost never die, and your damage is insane at the low end. The other benefit is that this build can transition into Frenzy Stackers, which is a super high-end softcore Raider build. But going Raider early is a huge grief, and I wouldn't recommend that for anybody. I have 2 more builds coming out for the League Starter. One of them's the Auto Bomber, and one of them's an all-time Occultist Classic. And I think both of the next videos I'll be releasing are very, very viable League Starters, especially if you're in softcore. I think they'll both be better than 99% of the builds you see out there, but I will not personally be playing them. Not because they aren't good builds, but because I don't think they have the potential to really quickly accelerate in an SF Hardcore boss race. And I hope to see you all this upcoming Friday when I go hunting for Darky's left nut.